For all you data people, almost 1 in 3 first-time land buyers end up regretting their decision. And it's not really that they regretted the decision to buy land, it's that they decided the land that they bought was the bad decision. I've seen it firsthand. I actually had somebody reach out to me recently that they're trying to figure out how to sell their property because when they bought it, they didn't go through it the right way. They thought they got an amazing deal, and they did. In terms of what everything else that that subdivision was selling for, they got an amazing deal, but now they can't sell it. So in this video, that's what we're going to talk about. What do you have to look for if you're buying land? Things that are giant, huge red stop signs that say, hell no, do not buy this property, go find something else. First thing is cheap land is not always any. We do it. I do it. I look for land, where I'm trying to buy property. And holy cow, that 5 acres is $10,000. I want to go see it. And you get out there and you realize why it's so cheap compared to everything else. The most recent one that I've seen, I had a client wanting to buy a property and I looked online, and right there in the description for the realtors, not in the public description, but in the description for the realtors, it said this land does not have any access. There's no way to get to the property other than maybe a helicopter. So unless you know how to get around that, unless you want to go buy a deeded access from one of the neighbors, which could cost you way more than what the land cost you, because the neighbor at that point knows you don't have the ability to get to that land, so they can charge whatever the heck they want. Anyway, that cheap land, there's a reason that it's cheap. Make sure you figure out what that reason is, and if you can't figure it out, get a professional in to help you, because I guarantee somewhere under all the BS, there is a reason that that 10 acres is $5,000 or whatever the heck you're seeing. Now this next one is going to be a little bit difficult, and it's going to take a lot of patience. Most people don't have this patience, but try to get your feet on the property that you're looking at in every season. In Texas, we kind of have 2 seasons. It's hot or it's thunderstorming, and that's it. I mean, yeah, we've got winter and fall and it cools off and you get cold fronts and stuff like that, but realistically, that's when you want to get your feet on the ground in Central Texas, is when it's hot and when it's thunderstorming, because you're going to find things like, oh, I don't know, maybe that access road is covered by 5 feet of water and it doesn't recede for 2 or 3 days after we have a major, 2 or 3 inches of rain in a night, which happens probably 3 or 4 times a year. So get your feet on the ground every season. In places like Colorado, you're going to want to know how much snow is up here. How fast do the cities get out or the counties get out and clear the snow from the road? Or is it even maintained? Or do I have to maintain it myself? That's a pretty important thing to know. If you are not in the area where you want to buy the land and you can't get your personal feet on that property, make sure you've got a team there that can get on there and somebody that you trust to tell you the truth in different parts of the year. And sometimes, like I know, look, here in Central Texas, I know what a property is going to look like when it's raining when I get on it, because I've lived here so long. I understand that. That's why I have realtors in all the other states that I'm looking for land, and I'm getting their opinion on what they know locally. If you don't have that, if you're looking in another state and you don't have somebody you can trust, reach out to me. I've got a lot of realtors, a lot of contractors and stuff like that all over the US, and I'm more than happy to make those introductions for you. I want to keep you out of trouble. That's one of the ways to do it. The next big thing that I see people do is they're looking for waterfront property. By the way, I'm just going to turn this around for a second because y'all have to see my best girl here, and she was just rolling in the dirt. Anyway, that's Charlie. She likes to come out when I'm doing these videos. But when you're looking for waterfront property, is the waterfront property actually giving you access to the water? We have things in Texas called Corps of Engineers lakes, and they actually exist everywhere in the United States. It's the Army Corps of Engineers. They built the lakes for water retention and stuff like that. Well, you can have a property that appears to be waterfront on a Corps of Engineers lakes, yet technically you don't have the ability to access the water through Corps of Engineers land. You can't put a boat dock in. You can't even go and build like a patio or a fire pit down by the water. Now, if there's not a fence, can you walk across it to get to the water? Yeah, probably. They're not going to throw you in jail for that. But if you've got dreams of a boat dock or a nice patio down, overlooking the lake or the river or whatever, you need to make sure that you actually have access to it, because if you don't, I mean, is it really going to be the same if you can't do what you want to do on that property? So again, make sure you understand, do you have access to the features of that land that you're looking for? Next way to stay out of trouble on this is understanding your location. If you're like me, you're looking for something that's a little bit removed. You know, you don't want to be around people all the time. Right now you're living in a big city, you're trying to get out of that. But at the same time, make sure you understand where the essential services are. If we're going into retirement, okay, we need to make sure that we're within, distance of a hospital that makes sense. You want to make sure that you have a grocery store that you don't have to travel an hour and a half for. Or maybe you're okay doing that. Maybe you go to the grocery store, once a month and you're okay with doing that. But keep that in consideration. The location is kind of a fine line between, is it far enough removed for you that you're getting what you want, but at the same time, is it close enough that if things happen, and look, we're all getting older, and if you end up having a health condition down the road, 5 years after you built your dream retirement property, well, dang, you don't want to necessarily have to move just to get closer to a hospital. I've had people had to do that before. So keep that in mind when you're looking for that location. Just because it feels good to be as remote as possible doesn't mean it's always practical, or if it is for you, at least make sure you have that discussion with yourself. Now, this is another one of those situations where it's kind of a buyer beware, and make sure when that cheap piece of property hits the market, you understand why it's cheap. I had somebody recently, they bought a piece of land, and the people that signed the deed didn't have the legal right to sign that deed and sell that piece of property. And this was a seller that thought that they had the rights to do that, but they didn't. We're also seeing a lot right now of it's just outright deed fraud, where people are listing properties, and it's typically rural, raw land properties. They're listing these properties for sale, they're selling them, and they're not the owners. And then the buyer at that point, they go to try to build something on there, or somebody catches them on that land and they're like, what are you doing? This is my property. And they're like, no, I bought this property. And then it has to go to court, and the buyer didn't buy it because the seller didn't sell it. The buyer just wasted a bunch of money and somebody made off with it. So understand who has the legal right to sell that property. And then always, always, always go through a title process with title research through a title company. In your state, it may be a fee office or attorney's office, but always make sure that you get title insurance. Make sure that you are buying something that you can actually buy, and it's not tied up with 15 other family members. You've got one family member trying to sell it, or again, worst case scenario, where it's deed fraud, and the person who has that property is living somewhere in another state or another country, and they're just selling it remotely and taking your money and leaving, and then you don't have the property. Next point that's going to keep you out of trouble and save you money and prevent you from buying the wrong piece of property is make sure you understand the building restrictions, the zoning restrictions, and things like that. A lot of times people are under the understanding that if you're not in a city, you don't have deed restrictions and things like that. Guys, that is wrong. Most of the land, that we have around us now at some point was a huge ranch, and over time it's been subdivided into smaller and smaller pieces. Well, if you're buying 100 acres, but the person who sold it put a seller-imposed deed restriction that you can only put one house on the whole thing and that you can't dig a well, I know that's kind of absurd, right? But it could happen. So make sure you understand what are the zoning requirements. That's more from the municipality, it'd be a county or a state thing, or what are the restrictions? And usually if it's rural land, it's going to be seller-imposed deed restrictions. Again, these are things that show up in title searches. So going back to make sure you're getting a title commitment, make sure you're getting title insurance, that you're closing it at a title company, or again, a fee office or an attorney's office, however your state works. Make sure you're doing that. This is another good time to remind you that people that do business in the area where you're looking, they are the ones you want on your side to help you avoid things like this. Have a realtor review documents. Have an attorney review documents. If you don't have somebody that you trust wherever you're looking, let me know. I have those people. I want to make those introductions to you. I don't want you buying a piece of property that you think is perfect and it ends up being something that's going to cost you 50, 20, 70, however many $1,000s. That's not what we want here. We want to make sure that when you buy that property, it's exactly what you thought it was and you get to use it the way that you want. Okay, next one I want to talk about is utilities. How are you going to get your utilities? Are there power lines? Are they close? Are they on your property? Water, wastewater. Maybe you're going to put in a septic. Maybe you're going to use rainwater collection. That's what I have. I love it. Maybe you're going to have to hook to city municipal water. Okay, is it accessible? Do they have capacity? Sometimes cities don't have capacity for wastewater, so you won't be able to put a house on there even if there's a wastewater line running right in front of you unless you put in a septic system. Access to a wastewater line in this area is about $15,000. Putting in a septic system is about $30,000. That changes the budget a little bit. So make sure that you understand where your utilities are and kind of where all of that stuff is coming from. The other thing, and by the way, if you're under contract or even before you go under contract, you can contact the utility companies. They'll talk to you, they'll tell you what's there. But again, that's part of due diligence. Make sure that you're doing that, or make sure you have somebody doing that on your behalf. The other thing is, do you want an off-grid property? What does that look like, and can you even do it? And I see a lot of advertisements now, especially like Arizona, Colorado, stuff like that. This is a perfect property for off-grid living. But if you're gonna put in solar panels, but you love the property because it's got giant pine trees on it, those two things don't go together. So what are your expectations for what you want your property to look like? And then does that expectation match up with what you want to do for your utilities? That's kind of a big deal. The next thing to keep an eye on is make sure that you have access to the property. Make sure that there's no major encroachments on the property, and make sure that you understand if there's any easements running through your property. On the access, I mean, you see it in the news all the time, and I hear it in real estate circles. You know, you can get to a property and there's a road that leads back to it, and you drive the road, the property's beautiful, okay, we're gonna buy this thing. And then when you get the survey, there's actually not a deeded easement to the property. You were driving on a road that's been there forever, that has been used by the property owner, but it's not deeded. It's not recorded with the county or with the state or whoever the jurisdiction is that takes care of that. And in Texas, there's different types of easements that would be, I believe it's an easement appurtenant, that it's been used for so long, there's an understanding that it's there, but by rights, if that neighbor wanted to fence that easement off and not give you access, that's within their rights. Now you could sue them, you could try to buy that easement, but again, if you're cutting across somebody else's property to get to your property and you don't have a legal right to do that, they have a legal right to shut that property off. Make sure you understand. And that brings us to that next major point here is make sure you get a new survey when you buy land. I understand when you buy houses, a lot of times we use old surveys because look, in a subdivision, those surveys don't change. Those surveys have been there since the subdivision was put in. They've been vetted over and over and over. You can do that. When you buy land, get a new survey because it's going to show what easements are there, what access points are there, if there's encroachments. I mean, there's stories that I've heard about the neighbor's fence line. You know, we've got a fence line right here behind me, a big high fence. Well, if that fence is 15 feet too far onto this land, but that property is 1,000 feet long, that's several acres that is fenced off into somebody else's property. And there are opportunities in some states where if they just fence your property in and they show that they're using it, it becomes their property and you've just lost it. So you may have thought you were buying 10 acres, but all of a sudden you're buying 6 acres and you can't get it back. So make sure you get that survey, check for access points, check for easements, check for deeded easements. And if sometimes you'll have a shared access easement with several neighbors, and you'll have an agreement that's a shared access agreement that dictates who has to take care of those roads. These are all things that you can figure out from the survey, and again, going back to get that title insurance because those deeded access agreements are going to be showing up in that title insurance. The next thing I want to talk about is, you finally found the property that you want, and you want to make an offer on it, but how do you know if the asking price is too high? How do you know if it's a good deal? Could be a steal. And in some states, you have public records and sales prices are public records, but not all sales prices are reported because, there could be a direct sale that doesn't go through a title company. Somebody may have done that. So make sure, and this goes back again to make sure that you've got somebody that you can trust that understands land where you're buying. Guys, I go to it all the time. Not everybody wants to use a realtor because it's kind of gotten a bad name over time. The dang salesman and all they want to do is sell a property, blah, blah, blah. I get it. And there are realtors who have no business selling raw land. They don't know what they're doing. So find somebody that's a professional that knows what they're doing. And we're not that hard to find. Heck, ask a realtor, have you ever sold a piece of raw land? Have you ever sold or bought 100 acres? You hope they don't lie to you. But anyway, when you go into those negotiations, having somebody like that on your side that can tell you, hey, This property is listed at $15,000 an acre, but nothing in this area has sold more than $7,000 an acre, and every last piece of property looks just like this, you know. Now, if it's got some amazing features, if it's got amazing views or something like that, okay, I can see paying a little bit more. But if it looks like everything else and you've got somebody that is local that is telling you that, you need to take that into account and make sure that you're not overpaying. I go back to it all the time. Don't ever fall in love with a piece of property, because if the seller loves it more than you do, they're going to make you overpay. They're going to think that their property is worth $15,000 an acre when it's only worth $7,000. You may be willing to pay 10, but don't fall in love with it. You don't want to pay 15 for a property that's only worth 7 or 10. It doesn't make any financial sense. And again, if you're looking for this for your dream retirement home or whatever, overextending yourself by $100,000 or $200,000 because you love the property doesn't make financial sense. Don't do that. And rely on those professionals in that area and ask them questions and have conversations about what the actual value of that land is. And again, this is a great time for me to reiterate, if you don't have those people that you trust in the area that you're looking, reach out to me. I know the people, I know the right people that do deal in raw land and construction and stuff like that, and I'm happy to make those introductions for you. That's what I live for. That's the whole reason I do this channel. Another big one is, what about mineral rights? And these change from county to county, state to state, property to property, realistically. And this usually falls into place more if you're looking at large land. We'll call it 25 acres plus, because if you've got a 5-acre piece of property, nobody's going to come and drop an oil well on there. But in Texas, most mineral rights at this point have been retained by previous sellers. Sometimes you can find mineral rights, sometimes they're partial mineral rights, but you need to know what that looks like ahead of time. You can find all the mineral rights are recorded in the county office, so you can research that. But I've done that personally, and I'm telling you, it is a pain, and I spent hours and hours and hours there. And to this day, I'm not sure if I found everything still. So if you're concerned about mineral rights, and sometimes you should be, but if you're concerned about it, you can hire people to do that for you. You can hire attorneys, you can hire landmen. Yes, that's a real thing. I know, Billy Bob Thornton plays one on TV, but you can hire landmen, and what their actual job is to go in and research mineral rights and find out who owns those mineral rights. The last thing you want is to buy 100 acres that's absolutely pristine and you love it, and then all of a sudden the oil company shows up and they're like, hey, here's a contract we have and we've got the ability to dig on this property. Now we're going to give you some money, but we're going to put an oil well right in the middle of your property. And you can't do anything about it. The only thing that you can do is collect a check from them, which, it's not a bad secondary prize. But again, if you had your idea of retirement set on this magnificent piece of property, and now all of a sudden there's an oil well sitting right in the middle of it, and you've got trucks running in and out all day, yeah, that kind of tends to change how you feel about the property. So make sure you understand who owns the mineral rights and what they can actually do as a result of that. The other thing that's becoming really is water rights, and that's considered a mineral. In Texas, it's a rule of capture. You have the ability to put a well on your property, and if you can pump it up from your property, that's your water. But now, people, when they sell properties, are retaining water rights in Texas. So you may not even have the ability to put a well on a property you buy here. And that's not even to talk about states that are dry, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, stuff like that. Getting water rights out there is really hard to do, and they're really valuable. Imagine if you wanted to put in a horse farm and you were going to have to irrigate an alfalfa patch. Well, you better check who owns the water, either that's running through that property or running under that property. Water is a precious resource. It's going to get more and more valuable as we move forward. So understand what access to water that you have, or if you don't have access to it, who has the access to your property? Can they just come and put in a commercial well and start pumping out millions of gallons a day, and now the well that you have for your house is dry because they're sucking all the water out from below it? Pretty important thing to remember.